Okay, so.
What is your concern about jobs being exported overseas? Like, how would you bring jobs back to America? Is there any?
I'm in favor of free trade. And not only that, I think that we ought to unilaterally drop our trade barriers to goods from other nations. I really do. I think that free trade will bring about the greatest prosperity to this nation over the long run from the perspective of the consumer, and it will there will be nothing. You talk about needing world peace. Nothing will promote world peace like free trade. Why? If people don't want to go to war? Why? It's bad for business. You know, and what's wrong with that? So what I would say is that we need to encourage foreign investment in this nation. When you hear people talk about the balance of payments, all that means that there's more investment, that there's investment coming in from foreigners and goods of ours going out. It's basically a mathematical equation. But what we don't want to do is we do not want to stop foreign investment from coming into this nation, which is a huge reason, probably the #1 reason why our interest rates in this nation are so low.
Do you know what the retirement pay is for a congressman, and would you change the retirement system?
I don't know. I haven't actually been thinking about that. It's a pretty nice check, is my understanding.
It's real good.
It's
Real good. I'm not sure what the second $10,000 was. 15,000.
15,000? Oh no, 15,000 a year? Oh, per month. Oh, that may be. No, sir. I'm sorry. I'm ashamed to say I'm ignorant as to what the retirees from Congress get, but I know it's a good pension. But would I work to yes, I'd work to change it, absolutely. And you know, I think that I haven't studied the issue, so I'm not going to come up with some policy extemporaneously. But I would say that it's another thing that has to be looked at. We have too many needs in our society to have the exorbitant retirement benefits that are going to congressmen.
In line with what he said, can we ever expect our three forms of government, the judicial, the legislative, and the executive, to have to live by the same things they're saying that we have to live by? For instance, they get special benefits for retirement, they get special insurance, health insurance, they get all sorts of fringe benefits just because they are elected officials. Why can't they live by what they expect us to live by?
Well, I tell you, the most outrageous thing, though, is the fact that they pass legislation that they exempt themselves from having to observe. I mean, there ought to be a constitutional amendment banning that. They need to, if they set rules for everybody else to live by, it is absolutely ridiculous that they exempt themselves from having to live by those rules.
Well, that's like the communists in Russia.
That means we're divided between the ruling class and the us workers.
I absolutely agree with you, sir.
Can we stick to the format of question and answer, because this is turning to peace.
Do you have another question, Dr. Stone?
Okay, as a libertarian, compare and contrast yourself with Ron Paul and Rand Paul and their policies.
I would say that I've known Ron Paul now for 22 years. I had the honor back when he was the Libertarian candidate in 1988 being a chauffeur for a couple of days in October of '88 when they wanted somebody to show up at appointments with him, but they didn't want to fly somebody in with him to, you know, incur airfare and all that. I hope Rand Paul is elected from Kentucky. I think he'd make a fine United States senator. The differences offhand, I would like to see Dr. Paul be a little more free trade oriented, frankly. I don't agree with him on the Texas highway. It's just a highway. We need good transportation in this nation. I respectfully disagree with him on that. But I suppose there's no single libertarian I agree with on all issues, but I would agree with Ron Paul and Rand Paul over 90% of the time. I think Dr. Paul is my congressman. He may be from the 14th district in Texas and I may live in Northern Virginia, but I consider Dr. Paul my congressman.
Based on your little brochure, you were looking at the flat tax. It would seem like the fair tax would be a more libertarian position.
I understand, and I will say this much. I think it needs to be looked at. However, there is no nation in the world currently that uses a fair tax and as its single source of government financing. And even though I'm a libertarian, I will have to admit that government finance is serious business. And there are various concerns that in terms of tax evasion over a certain percentage level of a sales tax, of the fair tax. The flat tax is something that has been proven, ironically, in Eastern European countries over the past 20 years. It is in use by at least a couple dozen nations around the world. It has helped their economies over the previous tax regimes. It is proven, and I think it's something we need to go to, that we can go to immediately, but I think the fair tax is something that should be looked at after we do that.
Over here.
2 weeks ago, it was announced that the Phase 2 of Dulles Rail would cost $1.35 billion more. The economic feasibility of Phase 2 has never been demonstrated, and the public has never had a chance to vote. What would you do with respect to the future of Dulles Rail?
Well, I turned back the clock and institute buses instead of trains. Buses are far more efficient. Transportation analysts have shown that buses are a far more efficient form of transportation than rail. And if there needs to be public transportation, that's the way it should have gone and not through a rail system. But I do think that it has to be open to the public. I mean, at the end of the day, I'll tell you I would be absolutely shocked if the following didn't happen, and that is that it's going to be heavily subsidized by the federal government. Taxpayers are going to have to kick in from the Commonwealth of Virginia, and that's part of one of the big problems with federal government spending, frankly, is grants to the states. It's absolutely out of control how those have skyrocketed over the past couple of decades, and this is one more example of federal money going to a local. Now we're the beneficiaries of it, and I'll probably use it once it's in. But the full cost has to be accounted for up front, and it hasn't been, and it's probably going to be an economic boondoggle at the end of it when it's all said and done.
Congress back in 1998 removed the protections offered by the Glass-Steagall Act back in the 30s. Leading this led, I believe, to the financial crisis itself. So, how would you propose to prevent banks from further speculation with funds from the Treasury?
Don't bail them out. That's what. I would say that frankly, they would have learned better in 2008 if they had been. I think that there may have been a sharper downturn in the economy in late 2008 and 2009, but you can look back to previous sharp recessions when the government didn't do anything, such as in 1920 and in other certain situations in the past, and the economy rebounded quickly. I think the same thing would have happened here. So I think that in answer to your question, first of all, I think that yes, there were businessmen who did things wrong leading up to the Great Recession starting in 2008. But it wouldn't have happened without government. It wouldn't have happened without the Federal Reserve keeping interest rates too low. It wouldn't have happened without Congress mandating that a major percentage of mortgages that are financed by Freddie and Fannie go to subprime mortgages. And so those are the main fuels to the fire. Business did some things wrong, but holding banks accountable and letting them go bankrupt if they make bad investments is the way to instill discipline there.
Now, the government worked back then. They actually, introduced the Glass-Steagall, which prevented banks from speculating in the market. They separated the investment institutions and the banking institutions. And in 1998, Congress removed that barrier, allowing banks to speculate with deposits and assets into the market. Would you be an advocate for removing that?
I would not be an advocate for bringing back Glass-Steagall. I think there could be market discipline on investments with banks, and that is what should happen. So I wouldn't bring that regulation back.